Our virtual layout tour today will take us to Northern Kentucky and Dan Stenger. Dan lives in Northern Kentucky and has been a model railroader on and off since high school. He had the obligatory Lionel train as a child, didn't we all? Which he sold to buy HO trains in high school after seeing his friend's HO layout in his garage. Dan modeled the Louisville-Nashville Railroad until he went to college, when he sold his trains to buy stereo equipment. He graduated college with a degree in music education and taught middle and high school band for 16 years, then served as a CIO until his retirement. Now he's a freelance musician. He got back into trains after taking his son to a toy store for his birthday on the same day as the train store's train show. Dan began buying HO trains at that point and building a layout. In 1995, he discovered garden railroading. He switched to G-scale, building a garden railway in his backyard, becoming a narrow-minded after deciding to model East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, the Eastern and Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad. Dan, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. So go ahead and begin sharing.
Okay, well, thank you. So welcome to Garden Railroading. As the introduction said, I was an HO modeler, and we were on our way home from a trip. Actually, had gone down to ride behind a steam engine down in Kentucky, and we saw on the marquee of the Drawbridge Inn, which is a convention center near my home, that they had a Garden Railway convention happening. And so we went over and checked it out and looked through some of the vendors, and there was a couple open railroads in my area. And so we took a look at those, and I realized that while I had limited space in the basement, I had plenty of room in the backyard. And also being someone that likes gardening, I kind of started to get interested in it. And I used to take my narrow gauge and short line Gazette magazine with me to the dentist. And he noticed one day that I was reading that magazine, and he said, would you be interested in buying a G-scale train set? And I said, sure. And so I bought that from him and was running it around in the garage. And my wife said, hey, we should build a garden railroad. And so that's kind of how we got started. So we're going to talk about just talked about the beginnings and how I've got into garden railroading. Going to talk a little bit about the history of garden railways, talk a little bit about the scales, what inspired me to model the area that I model, and then talk a little bit about battery power, how I constructed the railroad, of course, the tour and equipment, and the Christmas is kind of a surprise. So he started in England, and O scale was the scale that they used the most. They were built on baseboards because they used a lot of clock work was the preferred power until they got live steam, and live steam is very big in England. Second World War, as with a lot of things with the hobby, caused things to come to a halt. The narrow gauge was introduced in the 50s, and gauge 1 track became 45 miller became the most popular track. So everything in garden railroading today uses, now there are some O scale garden railroads, but almost everybody uses gauge 1 track. So LGB, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of LGB, but they introduced an American line in 1984, the Cook Mogul, and that really kind of set off the hobby in North America, especially the United States. Whereas before it was a lot of European stuff that LGB produced, but when they built the Mogul, that kind of got things going, and then Bachmann came out with the 10-wheeler in 1988. So I want to talk a little bit about scale. Garden scale or G scale or large scale, it's called all those things, really consists of multiple scales, unlike O scale or N scale or HO, where if you want to model a narrow gauge, you change the gauge of the locomotives, rolling stock, and the track. In large scale, we keep the track the same and change the scale to make the train fit on the track. So for instance, 1 to 20.3 would be the correct scale for 3-foot narrow gauge. So by building that scale and putting it on the gauge 1 track, you then make the gauge 1 track 3 feet wide in relationship to the model. 1 to 32 is a correct scale for the standard gauge. So again, by shrinking the model, you widen the gauge. So the photo on the left here, you'll see I think it's K27, and on the right, a standard gauge locomotive. You can see that the standard gauge locomotive is much larger than the narrow gauge locomotive. However, because in large scale, we have to adjust the size of the model. If you look on the right side, you'll see the mogul there and the RS3 are both taken basically from the same angle. And you'll notice that the mogul is bigger than the RS3, even though the RS3 is a standard gauge engine. So it's a little weird in large scale. What makes it even more difficult sometimes is the manufacturers don't always tell you what scale you're buying. So you have to either do some research, read reviews, or take your scale ruler with you when you go to buy something to see if it actually is the scale that you think it is. So as far as inspiration was concerned, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with a garden railroad. I knew I wanted to do something outdoors. I had a narrow gauge locomotive. And so I was trying to think, you know, what direction do I want to go? And I was on one of those old listserv type forums talking about, you know, what I was thinking about doing. And a gentleman emailed me and said, have you ever heard of the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina? And I said, I had not. I replied, I had not. And he said, let me send you a couple pictures. And this is one of the pictures that he sent. This is out of Mallory Hope Farrell's Tweetsy Country book. And there's just something about this photograph that just kind of spoke to me about the railroad. I guess kind of the desolation of it. There was nothing around, no buildings, no structure, just some tracks and a spur running off to somewhere. And just something just kind of spoke to me about that. So I went out and bought the book, the Tweetsy Country, read it probably in like one day. It's not a long book, but it had a lot of interesting information. And I really thought this was an interesting railroad. And plus, Bachman's 10-wheeler is modeled after the ET 10-wheelers that were, you know, famous with that railroad. So that's where the direction I decided to go. I don't, as it said in the description for tonight, I don't really attempt to model any specific area in the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. When I had the plan drawn up by a friend of mine, I wish I'd have thought of that. At the time, I just really was trying to go for more of a general look of what I thought I could do, make my layout look like East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. However, we do only run equipment basically for that railroad. So we try to be as realistic as we can, which is great because it keeps me from buying stuff I shouldn't be buying. It helps me to limit the rolling stock and locomotives that I do buy. So just briefly about the East Tennessee, Western North Carolina. It runs from Johnson City originally to Cranberry, and they built the railroad to run or to haul iron ore out of Cranberry. It had a iron ore called magnetite. Back in the 1800s, was a very popular type of ore. So they built the railroad to run the ore back over to Johnson City where there was a smelter. So that was the whole purpose of building the railroad. And then they acquired the Linville River, which was a logging railroad, and that interchanged there at Cranberry, and they bought it, and in 1913 upgraded it to the condition of the regular narrow gauge, ballasted track, and filled in a bunch of trestles, etc. And the Linville River Railroad ran up to Shoals Mills. So now the ET went from Johnson City up here to Shoals Mills. And then finally, it was about 7 miles away from Boone, and they said, we would like to have a railroad in the town. And so they convinced them to build on into Boone. So at its longest, it was 67 miles of narrow gauge track. Just kind of some scenes to kind of give you an idea of what I was trying to do with my railroad to kind of make it look like the area in which the ET ran. And this, of course, is one of the 10-wheelers crossing over a bridge there over the Doe River in Hampton. Remaining equipment, number 12, which the Bachman 10-wheeler is modeled after, still runs at the Tweetsie Railroad in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Boxcar number 434 is in Newland, North Carolina at the Southeast Narrow Gauge Museum there, which if you went to the Hickory Convention, you might have visited. The Linville Depot was a private residence after the railroad shut down, and the people were moving out, and they donated it to the Avery County Museum as long as they could raise 10 grand to move it. And so they raised the money in about 2 weeks, moved it, and have completely restored it. And then on the right is caboose number 505. It was a fishing shack after the railroad shut down, and you can see they had not quite started to restore it at that point. It's been almost completely restored now. Just a brief comment on dead rail. We've been running dead rail or onboard power for about 15 years. I got tired of cleaning track, and with the newer technologies, we started out using the air wire system. There's a throttle here. We started out using our first board was a G2. I think they're currently up to a G5. And then a few years later, they came out with these converters, and the converter basically takes the signal from the throttle and allows you to use any DCC board. So you can use a Tsunami, a TCS WOW, etc. And so this just is the interface, the DCC interface between the throttle and the DCC board. And then our last few installs, we've moved to Blue Namis. This is a Blue Nami board. It saves us about $75 a locomotive, because by the time you buy this board and a Tsunami for about 75 bucks less, you can buy this board and use our phone or a tablet to control the train. And if you don't want to mess around with CVs, Blue Nami is the way to go. Everything is right there on your phone. You pick your bell, pick your whistle, pick your sound system, etc. Most model railroads you can't see on Google Maps. You can see mine. This is my house. Over here is my garden railroad in the backyard. It's about 1,600 square feet, about roughly 40 by 40. So this is the plan of the railroad. It was designed by Paul Bussey. Paul Bussey owned a company called Applied Imagination that set up garden railroads all around the country. The New York Botanical Garden, Washington, D.C., the Bellagio in Las Vegas. They even did one in Europe. He designed those. He designed a lot of the garden railroads here in Cincinnati and built quite a few of them as a contractor. He agreed to design my layout for me. I had some requirements. As I said at the time, I didn't really have I want the covered bridge or I want the party point, but I I did want, I knew I wanted trestles. I knew I wanted tunnels. I knew I wanted water features. And kind of our feeling of garden railroads, at least in this area, is we need three things. We need water, we need sound, and we need changes in elevation. And to us, that makes the layout, your railroad, the most interesting. So you can see there's basically two loops. The yellow loop is stays level on the ground. So that would be 0. Originally, it crossed over in this tunnel here. It was a double tunnel, and that was annoying and hard to maintain. And so I bypassed that with these two black lines over here. And up here is a logging spur that I added that goes up into this area. And then I added a passing siding down in front and a spur track to have a little yard to store trains, especially when we're doing open houses. We really don't do a lot of operation. It's kind of a put them on, watch them run, have an adult beverage or a non-adult beverage, and watch the trains go. And that's kind of our way of enjoying the railroad. It's code 332 brass track, which is kind of standard. They also make nickel, silver, aluminum, stainless steel, but most people use brass. It's a 4-foot minimum radius, and it's all built a sectional track. I used Aristocraft track, and the tie strips are held on with screws. So if you take the screws out of the tie strips, you can flex the track any way you want. You can use a rail bender, or you can just take your hand and flex it. So anytime I had a curve, a straight track going into a curve, I would take that track and flex it to provide an easement to allow that track to move into the curve without it being, a drastic turn. The green loop is what we call the upper loop. It heads up and crosses over the lower loop, goes under the upper loop through tunnel number 3, comes out, goes across the stream, heads around here onto a island, across a trestle into another tunnel, and heads back down to the lower level where it started. We have, as I said, we have 2 trestles. One's a 16-foot long trestle. It's 32 inches high off the 0, and a smaller trestle in the back. We have waterfalls, a stream, and a pond. And I use crushed limestone. It's called crusher fines. Around here, they call it coarse sand, but that's what I use for ballast. And I use it with the dust because it helps hold it in place, helps keep it from getting washed away in the rain. So that's the plan. That's what it looks like from the upstairs of our house. This was taken a few years after I built it. So it looks a little different now, but you can see that the plan and the actual railroad pretty much look the same. So I did something right. As far as building methods, there's several ways you can build a garden railroad. You can build it like the real ones do, whereas, well, they don't dig trenches, but you can do it where the track sits in ballast, or especially popular in England, they use formers and create concrete roadbed. The only issue with these 2 methods is you either have to build on undisturbed ground or ground that's had time to settle or compacted. So with my design, I would have had to put in the lower loop, lay all my track, float it in the ballast or that, and then I would have to wait, fill all the dirt for the upper loop in, and then have to wait for that to settle. and that would have taken me a couple years, and I didn't really want to wait a couple years. So we use a wood method here in Cincinnati, and they use it other places in the country. So I started out, you can see I have a hill, and I had to know how much of the hill to remove to build the railroad. And so I basically made a string grid and took my plan and some spray paint and spray painted on the ground, and then brought in a bobcat and took all the dirt out to the level that I needed to do it. On the right there, you can see us constructing the road bed. It's made of 2x6s, ground contact treated lumber. We cut it into sections. If it's a curve, they have an angled end. If it's a straight, obviously it does not. The different sections are held together by a 10.5-inch plate, also 2x6, with 5 screws on each side. My road bed has been in the ground for 25 years, and I've only replaced about, I'd say, 15 feet of wood. So out of 350 feet, I've only replaced about 15. So now that's the old treated lumber. I don't think the new stuff is quite as good. They took all the bad chemicals out of it. So you can see here, after we built the different sections in the garage, and the reason we did that is we got about 3 inches of rain the night before we were doing our rail raising. We call it a rail raising, kind of like a barn raising, where your friends come over and help you put it in. So we built all the sections in the garage, and then after they left, I took them out. We hauled them out after we built them. And then after everyone left, I connected all the sections together. And then at a later point, I used a transit to shoot all my elevations, to set my grades coming up and down the hill, and etc. So that's on the left. So that was all the road bed in place. Then next you lay track, fill in the bottom with the tunnels, create your tunnels, bring in your rock, bring in your dirt. These are the tunnel liners on the right for the upper loop. They were also made by treated lumber. I wish I had made them a little bigger. I made them a little too small. You learn lessons as you go along. After we had all the track laid, all the tunnels and everything, the next step was to create the water feature. Again, my friend Paul and his crew came over, and I had already dug out the stream and the pond. We put in wooden dams to create pools, to create the waterfalls. An interesting story is when I was digging the pond, I had a rock at the bottom that I needed to get out, and I was sitting at the edge of the pond, a hole. It wasn't a pond at that time, it was a hole, and I had a spud bar. I don't know if you all know what a spud bar is, but it's a big heavy steel bar about 2 inches in diameter with a sharp thing on the end that you can use to pry against. Well, don't put it between your legs and pry on a rock, because if you do, it slips off the rock and hits you on top of the head, and then you have to go to the hospital and get stitches. So be careful with that. Picture on the right is us putting in the liner. We use roofing rubber because it's about half the price as a pond liner. So you can see them putting in the liner there. There's the first run of the waterfall there on the left, and this is what the pond and stream looks like today on the right. So we're going to start on the tour here. Go back to the plan. We're going to do the lower loop or the level loop first. So we're going to head out of town this direction and go around from there. So our main town is Cranberry. I chose the name Cranberry and Linville River because obviously Cranberry was one of the main towns, and Linville being the Linville River Railroad. For my railroad, we don't really model Cranberry as it was. I mean, most of Cranberry was a mine. obviously had all the things that go along with it, the depot, they had an engine shed, etc., water tank. So as I said, we did not try to model that town per se, but I did want the Cranberry Depot. And so we did build the Cranberry Depot here, and that's in front. I will tell you that it's built out of basically a PVC board that's similar to styrene, 3D printed windows. It's board and batten siding. There are 129 battens. There are 59 roof ribs, 248 wood planks for the platforms, and 114 raptor tails. So there's a lot of plastic and PVC into this project. I would also invite you to, and I'll point some things out as we head around the layout, but to kind of notice the way the landscaping, we attempt to fit that into the scene, to the scenes. We attempt to make it as scale as possible, and to have, kind of just notice how the railroad interacts with the scenery. I do have a few flowers. I tend to stay away from a lot of flowers, especially now. I used to do more flowers than I do now. I tend to just try to make it look as realistic as possible at this point. On the right here, you see the 10-wheeler number 9 heading out of town with a freight train, and out of the small yard there, past the water tank. This depot here was a stand-in until we built the Cranberry Depot that we have now. Once we come out of town, this spur used to connect to the upper loop, but now it's just a dead-end spur. And here about a week or so, I'm going to have a lumber company finished that's going to sell lumber, and they're going to get their lumber delivered on that spur. Here's a logging train pulling out of town. This is Linville River Climax. It's a Class B Climax. The Linville River had two different geared locomotives. They had a Climax and they had a Shay. On the right, you'll see 10-wheeler, I believe that's number 11, pulling a freight train into the tunnel. This is tunnel number 1. It goes under a road that goes up over top of it. This tunnel was put in when I got rid of the crossover tunnel. Here in both pictures, you can see a mugo pine. This mugo pine came from my original railroad in my old house, because once we got started on that railroad, and then we ended up moving to our current home. And I brought this. This is the first plant I ever bought, and I've been kind of doing a bonsai thing on it, and I've kept it about 2 feet around and about 2 feet tall. So I've kept it as scale as possible. Once we pass out of the tunnel, then we head around the back and cross under the short trestle. This trestle is made of mostly cedar and redwood. I used to make everything out of redwood, but it's really hard to get native or virgin redwood. All you can buy is the stuff they use for trim on houses, and it's finger jointed and just really not usable. So we use a lot of cedar now to build the bents, and also use pavers for piers. Work really great. Fill them in with some stone. Also use them for abutments, and then some of the abutments we use build some cribbing as well. After the train passes under the trestle and continues around the loop, it comes up along the stream. This is C8 or C16 number 3 Unaka. Started out on the ET as a wood burner. This is actually a 1:24 scale locomotive, but since the C16 that they had was a small locomotive, you can kind of get by with using it, even though it's a little under scale. After you pass along the stream there, you can see the stream behind the trestle. You pull through the back of the town. So we've crossed under the main trestle. Here's headed through town. This again, the climax, pulling a logging train. And then over on the right, same logging train, only this time it's Linville River Shea number 1 pulling the train. So after you go past here, there's a double girder bridge, steel girder bridge. A friend of mine and I welded this up, these 2 bridges up in his garage. So you pass over the bridge, and then you head into tunnel number 2. This is the second time we're crossing under the main trestle. You can see the stream coming down here. Here's the girder bridge we just crossed, and this is the upper loop heading this way. So the train's about to enter tunnel number 3. Here's caboose 505. This is a kit bash from a Bachmann, 2 Bachmann cabooses that I bashed together to make number 5. After it comes out of number 3, or tunnel number 3, or 2, excuse me, my fault. It passes under the main trestle one more time. This is number 11 again with the freight train. Up here on the top, you can see a Warren truss bridge underneath the as part of the trestle. This is an Aristocraft product. It's really made for indoors, but I keep it stained and protected, and it's part of it's been rebuilt a couple times because of the wood deteriorating outside. Once you come out of the trestle, then we're heading along the continuing along the lower loop. The Cranberry Waterworks here covers up a filter. Water actually goes into the filter and then comes back out of the filter into the pond. I get more comments on this building than anything on my entire layout because people like the fact that the water comes out of it. I think this is like the second thing I ever scratch built. Here's Unaka number 3 again, with this time with a passenger train passing the Cranberry Waterworks on both sides. Here you can see the school building in the background. This is a miniature hosta here. This is a Blue Point juniper here. And as we pull into Cranberry again, you'll see the same Blue Point juniper, and it has kind of a smaller needles, so it works well as a small tree. This is Deaton's garage. Tim Deaton is my friend that works on my cars for me, and so I built a garage and named it after him. This is a bird's nest spruce here that I keep trimmed down to stay tree-like. And then you'll see another freight train heading up the upper loop here on the right. This is the pond over here. These are the rocks along the pond. Over on the right then, we see the same train starting to pull into the yard and continuing. This concludes the circuit for the lower loop. This is the other side of that bird's nest spruce. We use a lot of ground cover. This is a sedum. I think it's called red creeping, or I'm sorry, a thyme. It's called red creeping thyme. It stays very close to the ground and gives it kind of a scale appearance. Over here is another mugo pine. This is a dwarf mugo over here. And the yard office here was kit bashed out of a couple of Corber buildings. And then you can see another 10-wheeler sitting in the yard here. So now we're going to take a tour of the upper loop. We leave Cranberry here, head up over the pond, across a steel bridge, another bridge here, a straining pony truss bridge here, another pony bridge here, into tunnel number 3, loop around, cross again on a Warren truss bridge, cross over the rest of the loop on a plate girder bridge, swing around. This is the logging spur heading up here, swings around on the smaller trestle, comes into what we call the island because it kind of sits by itself and it's connected by the 2 trestles. Passing siding there where you can pass another train, heads out onto the 16-foot trestle into tunnel number 4, heads down grade. This grade down is about 9%. So we normally don't run trains up that direction, although we can run the logging trains that way. Comes down, crosses over the lower loop, heads into tunnel number 5, comes out of tunnel number 5, and we're back down in Cranberry. So here you can see number 11 pulling a freight train up out of Cranberry, heading up the upper loop. This is the interchange switch to the lower loop. Here's that Mugo pine again. Here's some more of the ground cover. This is called a lime thyme. Or no, I'm sorry. Yes, lime thyme. So there's all kinds of different variations. Grows a little taller. Over here on the right side, you see it's about to head onto the steel truss bridge. Originally, I had a bridge that looked like a steel bridge, but it was actually made of wood. Miami Valley, I believe it's Bridge Company here in Cincinnati, milled out redwood to look like I-beams and H-beams and things. But the birds would sit on it and rock back and forth and break the bridge. So I replaced it with a steel girder bridge. And you can see the pond here. The train's about to cross over the pond. Once we pass over the pond, and here's the straining pony truss bridge. This was built from plans in Model Railroad or Kalmbach's Bridges and Trestles book. And it has all the pieces that the real bridge has, including the tension rods, etc. Over here on the right, you'll see a train coming up as well. This is when I first built it, and I had not stained it yet. By the way, the stain that I use for all of the trestles and bridges to try and make it look like creosote is called cinders, which I thought was kind of cool. So we're heading up the hill here, just crossed over the lower loop. This is tunnel 2, goes around in here. Once you pass over that bridge and the other pony bridge over the stream, you head into tunnel number 3. Here's the Alberta spruces. You can see one here in the foreground. Here's one that the train is passing. This is our third set of Albertas. They get, or second set, excuse me, they get about 6 or 7 feet tall. So every few years we cut them down and buy new ones to keep them scale, because in roughly half-inch scale, a 5-foot tree would be a 100-foot tree, and they didn't have any of those in North Carolina in the time that we were modeling. You see C16 number 6, excuse me, C18 number 6, coming out of the tunnel. On the ET, tunnel number 5 was called the sand tunnel because it was made, the dirt was very sandy. In fact, they actually had a spur there where they would shovel sand into gondolas. But so they had to line it with timber, and they had timber portals. So I took that as an opportunity to have a timber portal on the railroad. So we've headed out of tunnel number 3, and we're about to cross the loop. There's a different train. Here's another Alberta heading around, and it's about to head onto this through truss bridge. This bridge has 40 of those tension rods. Every one of them are threaded with nuts and washers to hold them together. So I started counting. I was like, that's a lot of rods to thread. But hey, got to do what you got to do. Here's a train, excuse me, coming out of that through truss bridge. This is all 20.3 equipment. These are both AccuCraft passenger cars that we painted for the ET. And it's about to head on to the steel girder bridge. I bought this from a friend of mine when he tore out his railroad. Here's a different train. Here's another one of those bird net spruce that we keep pruned. This is a Japanese maple here. You can't see the leaves. It's a new one. I had an older one there, but it finally died and I had to replace it. This is some sedums here. We don't have a lot of sedum, but we have some. So after it passes off that girder bridge here in the background, it goes past the logging spur switch. And here's a boxwood. We use a lot of boxwoods. Here's some more Alberta spruce. Here is a another one of the Japanese maples that we have, heading across the small trestle onto the island. And then over here you see climax, the Linville River pulling a log train onto the island. The hotel in the background here for the tourists to come up into the mountains and enjoy the cooler weather and take a look at some of the views of the waterfalls. The waterfalls would be over here, and the stream, etc. They had several hotels up in the mountains. Roan Mountain had a huge hotel. There were several other ones that people could come up in the winter or in the summertime to escape the heat down in Johnson City. Once we pass over the island, we're heading on to the big trestle, which you see on the right side. And you see a lot of the Alberta spruce. There's some sedums here. This is a Japanese creeping green juniper. You see some railroad ties here. Paul Bussey, the guy that I was saying that designed the railroad, he used a lot of these in his commercial work and some of his private work. So this is kind of my homage to Paul. I put just a few in here to use the retaining wall at the end of the trestle. So here's the big trestle. You see a shay pulling a log train across it. This girder bridge we welded up out of some steel to cross over the stream. You see the stream here. There's that lower loop that runs along the stream. Here's the end of the trestle. It starts down grade here. You can see you got a few of these barrel fire barrel stands here in case the trestle catches on fire. Here's another Alberta spruce. Another one here. Here's the lower loop that comes out of tunnel 2, heads around to the front. Here's some more of those pavers that I use for piers. And then also, if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see I cast. These are just about an inch thick. And then there's stone underneath them. After it passes the trestle, it starts to head into tunnel number 4. We're heading down grade here. It's still pretty moderate grade until it hits the tunnel. Then it really starts heading down here. Here's some different times here, a little more wild area. So we have a little more wild time. Coming out of tunnel number 4 and heading down the grade, here's again the shay pulling the log train. There's the same tunnel here. Here's the girder bridge that we passed over before. So this is going up the upper loop, and this is where it comes back down and heads down the grade. The grade's pretty steep once you get to here. Finally, we pass through tunnel number 4, and you can see a lot of the time up on the side of the hill. Here's a little boxwood here that we use for a tree. This is a miniature one we get out of Washington State. They sell these miniature boxwoods. So we're heading down grade and we're about to head into the town, which we're back here on the picture on the right. There's that Mugo pine. This is a pygmy crimson pygmy barberry. Here's a boxwood in the background. Here's a Japanese maple in the background here. So that concludes the tour of the upper loop. Some of the structures, these are all kits or kit bashed. These 2 buildings were actually kit bashed out of one of these buildings. I took 2 of these and built, put an upper story, a full story on this building, a little side entrance here, and then a shorter building. This is my wife's. She's a very crafty person, does a lot of crafts. So this is her dry goods and general store, does a lot of sewing. And then her family owns a candy company that my son works for. She works for seasonally. And her grandmother had a candy store in Covington, which is a little bit just south of Cincinnati, right across the river from Cincinnati, Kentucky. They had a candy store where they made homemade ice cream and candy in the back, and they sold it in the front. And my father-in-law took over the company from the grandfather and built the factory that they have now. So that's the family here. Amanda's place is named after my daughter. She is not a bartender, but I had to have a building for her, so she has a saloon. These two buildings were Kit's. Swanson's Meat is named after Ron Swanson. If you ever watch Parks and Recreation, that show, Ron was into meat, so we have Swanson's Meats. And then Penny Blossoms, if you're familiar with the show The Big Bang Theory, you probably know what penny blossoms are. This is the first large-scale building I ever scratch built. My wife and I were driving through the Smoky Mountains and saw this church, and I took a picture of it. And when I got home, later on, this was years ago when we first got married. And when I started to build this, I thought it would be neat to build this church. So I built a condensed model of this church, and you can see a bride and groom here have just gotten married, and the photographer's down here taking a picture of them at the church. There's boxwood. Oh, I'm sorry, that's some sedum. There's a boxwood over here now. It's not in this picture. So these are the locomotives that we have. I have a live steam Mogul Watauga number 1. It's 20.3. Cranberry number 2 is a regular electric model, and it's also 20.3. C16 Unaka number 3 is a half-inch scale model. C18, which is really a Bachmann C19, but we're using it as a C18. Number 6 is also 20.3. And then we have 4 10-wheelers, number 9, 11, 12, and 14, and they're all 22.5. We have 2 logging locomotives in service right now. The Class B Climax 20.3, it's a Bachmann, and the 2-truck Shay number 1 is also a Bachmann model. And then we have an LGB Porter that I modified for Cranberry Coal and Iron, who had the iron mine there in Cranberry, and they used a little porter, a narrow gauge porter, to haul the iron ore up out of the mine. So we have a model of that. So those are the locomotives. I also have an RS3, the ET standard gauge part of the track from Johnson City to Elizabethton, and ran standard gauge trains. And they had 2 RS3s, and so I have 1 RS3 that you saw the picture of before. So this is one of the 10-wheelers made by Baldwin, and this is number 11. Number 9 and 10 were smaller. Number 11, 12, and 14 were a little bit larger locomotives. Over on the right is Mogul number 2, Cranberry. This was a kit bash from a Bachmann Mogul, 20.3 Mogul. We put on a new extended smoke box and smokestack, a new cab. The boiler is a straight boiler, and so we had the Bachmann model has a wagon top, plus the domes are in the wrong order. For some reason, the ET had the bell, the steam dome, instead of the steam dome and the bell. So we built a boiler out of PVC pipe. Everything else is Bachmann. Everything down here is Bachmann. Added some air tanks and things, all the domes up here, and the tender are Bachmann. These are the 2 logging engines. As I said, they've been weathered and detailed with some details on them. So those are our 2 logging engines. Since I model in 2 different, even though it's all large scale, I model in 2 different scales, 20.3 and 22.5. The boxcar So everything except for the passenger cars, the ore cars, and log cars, I have to scratch build because nobody makes them. So Caboose, Boxcar 408, I've been trying to build at least one of every car that they had. Hopper number 4, a wood car. The ore cars are Bachmann, the log cars are Bachmann, even though I extended them to make them the right length. The passenger cars are AccuCraft. Excuse me. The 22.5 Bachmann equipment are box cars, some Aristocraft as well, gondolas, flats, stock car. The ET actually had 2 trailer on flat cars that they hauled around. Apparently, if you took merchandise in a truck on the road from Tennessee to North Carolina, they would charge you a tariff. But if you put that trailer on a train, there was no tariff. So they put the trailers on the train to avoid the tariffs. And then the passenger cars are also Bachmann. So this is my Boxco 408 that I scratch built in 20.3. It's mainly out of styrene, although there is some wood and detail parts from different Ozark Miniatures, Phil's Narrow Gauge. Some of the details are scratch built. Hopper car number 4 is all wood, except for obviously the metal parts and the trucks, but it's built board for board. And they were built to actually haul iron ore, not coal. Now, after the mine shut down, they did haul some coal, but they weren't built for that purpose. They were built to haul iron. Sorry. Part of having an outdoor layout is sometimes you have to reconstruct things. One of the tunnels was collapsing because of all the dirt. It wasn't really collapsing, it was sinking. And so the trains would not fit through it. So I had to dig out, move part of the trestle, dig out about 2.5 feet of dirt, pull out the old liner. You can see I built the new liner out of concrete block, and I built it a lot wider and a lot taller. This is the pipe that goes up to the top of the waterfall to send the water up. And these are pavers that I use for the lid. Then once I had that done, filled the dirt back in. There's the upper loop. That track had to be removed because the tunnel runs back in here. So I had to take track and road bed out, but you can see the plates there. And then I use concreted stone in to make natural tunnel portals. And these are rocks that I piled up to hold the rocks until they, the cement dried. And then here's where that straining pony truss bridge usually sits. So that had to come out too. This is my original trestle. I built the year after I built the railroad. So this was built in 2001. You can see it's touching the ground. That caused it to start to rot from the ground up. In 2013, we replaced part of the bents. So we took the bents out, the wood that was rotten, we removed, we added new wood. Unfortunately, last 2 years ago, all that wood rotted. And so I scrapped the whole trestle and built a whole new trestle. So this is the trestle you saw on the most of the slideshow is the most recent trestle. So I figure this one's going to last me 12, 13 years, and I'm 68. I don't think I'm going to worry about it in 13 years. So we started doing what we call the Christmas Trains and Lights Spectacular. We put 16,000 lights on our Garden Railroad. We ran Christmas trains. We were open on Friday nights in December. Over the past 22 years, we've had about 6,000 people come and visit our railroad. These are just some of the pictures from the open houses. Hung it up this year. 22 years was enough. Unlike indoor layouts, we have to deal with snow, ice, rain, you name it. One of the questions I get from people is, do you take the track up? Do you take the buildings in? No, everything stays out all year round. You can see here we had a pretty heavy snow. You can't even see a building. They're all covered in snow. But, you know, the snow melts and they're fine. We have more problems with sun. You would think that the snow and the rain would be the biggest problem, but the biggest killer is UV rays. That makes plastic fragile and you know, does all kinds of nasty stuff to your windows and your buildings and things like that. And then we have to deal with larger than indoor pet animals, as you can see from this deer here. There's actually 4 of them here, but this is the one that I got in the Garden Railroad. Generally, they don't cause a lot of problems, although one year they pulled the lights off the top of one of these Alberta spruces and ate the whole top of the tree off. They didn't eat the lights, they just ate the top of the tree. And one of them, every once in a while, they'll knock over a building or sometimes destroy a building by kicking it as they run by. So we have to deal with some nature as well. Here's my contact information, email, cell phone number, my Facebook page. And then I also have a website for my railroad, the cranberrylinville.com, if you want to see more pictures or find out more information. That's about all I got.